In the summer of 1918, Jamaica erupted in a flash of violence that still rankles in the island's memory. A lover's quarrel, a beaten policeman, and grotesque rumors of murder and cannibalism became the tinder that set off one of the worst anti-Chinese outbursts in Caribbean history. The Chinese presence in Jamaica began in the mid-19th century, when small groups of migrants from southern China arrived as indentured laborers after emancipation. Many found plantation work unbearable. When their contracts ended, they moved into towns and villages, opening country shops, bakeries, laundries, and small wholesale businesses. Those shops supplied everyday needs and extended credit to poor families, services that made Chinese shopkeepers essential to rural life, but also highly visible, economically successful, and in the eyes of some, suspect. The story that ignited the 1918 violence started in Ewerton, St. Catherine. On the night of July 7th, a Chinese shopkeeper returned to find his housekeeper and lover with acting Corporal MacDonald, a local black policeman. A fight followed. MacDonald was beaten so badly he disappeared for 2 days. In the absence of reliable information, rumor rushed in to fill the gaps. Stories spread that MacDonald had been murdered, that his body had been chopped up and salted, and in the ugliest versions that the attackers had eaten parts of him. Those claims were never substantiated. MacDonald eventually reappeared alive, bruised and shaken. The rumors, however, had acquired their own terrible life. Crowds in multiple parishes, St. Catherine, St. Anne, St. Mary and Clarendon among them, began looting and burning Chinese-operated shops. Windows were smashed, inventories emptied, buildings set alight. In some towns, dozens of shops were destroyed in a single day. Most of the violence was aimed at property rather than people, but the panic, fear and the humiliation suffered by Chinese families were profound. The episode revealed how quickly economic resentment, racial othering and lurid gossip could combine to produce mass violence. 2 decades later, the island would see another outbreak of anti-Chinese attacks amid an even broader social convulsion. In 1938, Jamaica experienced a wave of labor unrest that swept plantations and towns. Strikes, demonstrations, and violent confrontations erupted as wages, working conditions and political representation became flashpoints. The 1938 disturbances are remembered primarily as a labor rebellion that led to the rise of organized trade unionism and new political leaders. But they also exposed simmering inter-ethnic resentments. Chinese-operated shops and businesses, long seen as intermediaries between credit and consumption in the countryside, were once again singled out in some places as symbols of an oppressive local economy. Angry crowds, already mobilized by strikes and protest, targeted these shops in acts of looting and intimidation. Unlike 1918, the violence of 1938 was inseparable from a larger movement against colonial economic structures. The attacks on Chinese property were part of that wider upheaval rather than an isolated moral panic. But the result was the same for affected shopkeepers: loss, fear, and a stark reminder of their vulnerable social position. The third major period of anti-Chinese hostility arrived in fits and starts during the decades after independence, especially through the 1960s and 1970s, when Jamaica's politics turned bitter and violence became more common. This era saw high unemployment, inflation, and rival political factions sometimes using community tensions to stoke support. There were episodes of targeted attacks on Chinese businesses during riots and political clashes, and a steady stream of threats and harassment that prompted many Chinese Jamaican families to consider emigration. Although these later incidents rarely matched the scale or sudden contagion of 1918, they compounded a sense of insecurity and pushed a number of established families to seek new lives abroad in North America and Britain. Across all 3 episodes, 1918, 1938, and the post-independence unrest, the same dynamics recur. Chinese immigrants and their descendants were small in number but prominent in commerce. They supplied goods, extended credit, and created densely knit family businesses that succeeded through thrift and hard work. That success, in a society riven by colonial hierarchies and deep poverty, made them both indispensable and resented. Rumor and myth amplified ordinary grievances into moral panics. The cannibalism story of 1918 is a striking example of how grotesque fiction can feed fear and violence, even when it contradicts the facts. Economic hardship provided motive, racial and cultural difference provided a target, and gossip provided the accelerant. The legacy of those events is complex. On one level, the riots are recorded as episodes of criminal destruction and community trauma that hastened the migration of some Chinese Jamaicans and reshaped local economies. On another, they are cautionary tales about how fragile social bonds can be when inequality, fear, and rumor converge. In the years since, Chinese Jamaicans have remained prominent in commerce, culture, and civic life. Their food, businesses, and public service are embedded in Jamaica's modern identity. Yet the memory of property smashed and lives upended in 1918, 1938, and the turbulent decades after independence serves as a reminder that economic integration alone does not erase the old divisions, and that stories, especially ugly and salacious ones, can still do lethal work if they are allowed to spread unchecked.